Hola a todos. Hoy vamos a hablar sobre el pretérito y imperfecto en español. I hope you're all doing well, and I'm excited for this lesson today. So our objectives for the day are to understand the difference between the past tenses in Spanish and to learn how to conjugate the regular verbs in the imperfect while also learning how to conjugate the verbs in the preterit. All right, let's begin. The imperfect. Imperfect is one of the forms of the past tense in Spanish that is commonly used. So when we're using the imperfect, it is used to describe ongoing actions in the past, background information, repeated actions, emotions, and mental states, along with age and time. So for example, times where we use the imperfect in English is saying things like, I used to play football. So it's describing how you might have played football when you were 5, but you still could play football now. It's not something that has a definite ending. It's something that can continue to go on and you can continue to improve throughout your life. And with background information, it's saying something like once upon a time. So this is giving background that is pretty vague. Usually the imperfect is used to describe vague actions that just aren't completed. So once upon a time has no real specific ending. It would be different than saying one yesterday. Like one time yesterday is different than once upon a time because this background information is a bit more vague. Also, this goes for repeated actions in the past. So for example, if you were to say, every day I eat breakfast, it's not implying that you just eat breakfast on today. It's implying that it's a continuous action, that you eat breakfast every day, not just one day. And then the imperfect is also used for emotions, like I was so happy. It's not saying that you're not happy now, but in that moment in the past, you were happy, and maybe you're still happy. And then with age and time, you would say I was 10 years old. You might still be 10. At one point you were 10, and so it's a still ongoing action in your life. So that is specifically what the imperfect is for. It's for those past tenses that don't really have a definite ending. It's not a definite fact. It's not a definite feeling. It's not a definite action. So that is when you're speaking Spanish, you would use the imperfect instead of the preterit. So now our big question is, how do we conjugate the imperfect tense? In Spanish, we have 3 different kinds of verbs. AR verbs, ER verbs, and IR verbs. ER verbs and IR verbs share the same common ending. However, AR verbs have a pretty unique ending. So when we're conjugating verbs in the imperfect tense, we're going to take the verb, eliminate our infinitive ending, which would be AR, and add the alternative ending depending on who you're talking about. So if you wanted to say, I play football, yo jugaba fútbol. As you see in this chart, yo aba, tú habas, él ella usted aba, nosotros habamos, vosotros habáis, ellos ellas ustedes haban. Those are the alternative endings that you would add onto the verb after eliminating the infinitive ending AR to indicate who exactly you are talking about. Now, the same thing goes for ER and IR verbs. They're a bit easier because they do share the same endings. So this could go for either IR or ER verbs, but you want to end it. But once when you eliminate the infinitive ending, ER or IR, you would add the alternative imperfect ending. Ia, ias, ia, iamos, iais, ian, to indicate whoever you are talking about in the sentence. So now some examples. If you were to conjugate the verb hablar in the imperfect to say I used to speak or I used to talk about, if you were talking about myself, I'd say yo hablaba. If I were talking about you, informal, yo tú hablas. Usted hablaba. Nosotros hablábamos. Now, what you may notice is that in hablábamos, there's an accent on the A. When we put an accent in Spanish, it's usually to preserve the sound. So instead of saying hablábamos, it's trying to emphasize hablábamos. That way you can protect the Spanish sounds. Then, so don't forget, always when you're conjugating nosotros in the imperfect on AR verbs, it will have an accent. Vosotros habláis y ellos ellas hablaban. Now, when it comes to the ER-IR verbs, all of them include an accent on the I. So when in doubt, you will always put an accent on the I, unless it's an irregular verb. So if you want to say I used to eat, yo comía, tú comías, él, ella comía, nosotros comíamos, vosotros comíais, y ellos, ellas comían. These are just examples of what it should look like when you're conjugating regular verbs. Now it's time to talk about the preterit. So the preterit tense is also used to describe the past. However, this is more of a definitive past. These actions are completed and they're not exactly reoccurring again, as if they were in the imperfect, but both are used to describe the past. So the imperfect is generally used to describe completed actions, sequential actions, specific time frames, and interrupting actions. So for example, some translations to English of the preterit would be, I went to the park. It's a completed action, it's definitive, and it's indicating that you only went to the park one time. When it's sequential actions, it's, again, something only that happened once, and that isn't really something that's continuous. I arrived, saw Marie, and gave her my gift. You're not going to continuously arrive to this party, per se, throughout the past. It's a one-time, I arrived. Finally, specific time frames. If someone indicates that it happened at a specific day and time, then you know that it's the preterit because it is, again, it's completed, it's specific, and it's a fact that it happened. So like last year, I visited Spain for a vacation. It's indicating that it happened one time last year, and it has a specific time. That's how you know that it should be conjugated in the preterit. And finally, for interrupting actions. This is because, again, it's a definitive action that happened during something else. So you could say, I was in the middle of class when my phone rang. The phone ringing is a for sure thing that occurred in the middle of you being in class. And that is when you use the preterit. So the major difference between using the preterit in Spanish and using the imperfect in Spanish is when you're describing past events that are completed and factual. The imperfect is going to be used when it's an ongoing event that could still be occurring in the present. So how do we conjugate these verbs? Similar to the imperfect, you're going to eliminate the infinitive ending, AR, ER, IR, and then add the alternative ending. And again, same with the imperfect. ER verbs and IR verbs share the same ending. As we see in the list, in the AR verbs, it's haste, amos, hastiais, y aron. Whereas ER-IR verbs, it's iste, io, imos, isteais, ieron. And those are the alternative endings that you're going to add on to the verb depending on who you're talking about. Some ejemplos. So if you wanted to conjugate hablar again, but this time in the preterit, to say I spoke, I said, then you would say yo hablé. Talking about someone else, tú hablaste. Ella habló. Nosotros hablamos. Vosotros habláis. Y ellos, ellas hablaron. Notice that there is accents in the yo form and in the third person singular form. Then when we move on to ER-IR verbs, you add those alternative endings. Yo comí, tú comiste, él, ella comió, nosotros comimos, vosotros comisteis, y ellos, ellas comieron. Again, keep in mind that the yo form and the él, ella form have accents on their endings. Gracias, muchas gracias para escuchar de lectora y vamos a hablar sobre los irregulares mañana, porque hay muchas irregulares en el pretérito that we'll have to learn and make sure that we understand. However, before we leave, I have some practice that I would like you to complete and then message me your responses. So the first 4 verbs we're going to conjugate into the imperfect. If you need a refresher on what those endings are, they're in this PowerPoint slide. And then the second 4, I'd like you to conjugate into the preterit. And again, if you need reminders, there is a slide with all of their endings that you would add. Let me know if you need anything else. Muchas gracias y adiós.